Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Well, we are back for another episode, and we've been doing a series here talking about the hard financial truths when it comes to divorce. And we've talked about a couple of different things, but today we're going to be talking about parenting time and child support and kind of how that's affecting the financial situation. So, Bobby, as always, it is so great to be here with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. As always, great to be here. And I'm excited to dive back into these financial truths because the financial aspect can be kind of the scariest part of this for some people, depending on where you're at. Certainly, we all have different fears in the divorce process. Am I going to lose my kids? Am I going to lose my house? Am I going to be able to afford to live, if you will? So kind of unwrapping each one of these financial truths, I think is going to give people a little better idea of what they have to look forward to or not look forward to, and maybe how to help themselves a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's dig right in. We're going to talk about how the numbers work. And our first truth is that Illinois supports guidelines that they don't care about being fair. They care about the formula. And we've talked about this a little bit in the past, Bobby, but let's obviously review that today because in Illinois, it really is a formula as far as what that child support is going to look like. So can you sort of talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Child support is based on a income shares model, as they call it. And basically what we're doing is we're taking one side's income, the other side's income, we're adding it up, and then we're applying a formula to decide how much each person is going to contribute to child support. And it just spits out a number, and that's the number we're going to get and use. It's called a guideline support, which means that the judge doesn't have to use it, but in 99% of cases, they are going to use it. And what I've said before, what I was talking about before when we were going over the notes for this, was that child support is not equitable. You know, we hear equitable a lot in the divorce process, and that's the standard by which we split property. It's got to be split equitably, and that means kind of fairly, looking at the totality of the circumstances. We don't do that at all for child support. The number is what it is. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about quote unquote affordability. And that's a harsh reality. I mean, if you're really making ends meet with your current lifestyle, you're living kind of paycheck to paycheck, and that could be you're either making $50K a year or $250K a year. You're living paycheck to paycheck, and then you get hit with a child support order that's either, anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 a month, depending on your income and your spouse's income. That can be a huge burden that you didn't see coming.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it, and as you're talking about this formula, we've talked a lot about that there's a lot of feelings when you're going through a divorce, but we have to kind of get down to the facts. And this is such a great example because the formula you're talking about really doesn't care about your feelings, right? I mean, it doesn't it just is what it is, what no matter how you feel about it, correct?
Yeah, and exactly. I've been in court many times when people are being held in contempt for not paying child support. And that's what happens if you don't pay child support. Then the other side can basically request that you're held in contempt, and then you get a very short period to pay. And if you don't, ultimately you could be put in jail for not paying. But what sticks out in my mind is what one of the judges always said. And when people say, well, judge, I have other bills to pay, the judge always says, well, those bills aren't court ordered. My signature is not on those bills, meaning you're not held in contempt for not paying those bills. Now, some other things could happen, but those bills really have more flexibility. Maybe your car note is $1,000 a month when really you could get a car for $300 a month, or you could buy a car that you don't have a note on entirely. Like, you do have to change your lifestyle in order to afford child support. There's no other way around it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up lifestyle because that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about this. So the court isn't really taking into consideration what your current lifestyle is, like what you're driving, what you're wearing, how big your house is, what vacations you're going on. The court is really looking at this formula and going, I don't care about any of those things. They're not concerned with your lifestyle. They're more concerned about what this number is going to be.
Yeah, people start the divorce process and they fill out this financial affidavit. And the financial affidavit goes over everything and it goes over your expenses. And you're able to put down on there what you're paying for your car note, what you're paying to do your hair, your nails, your gym memberships, all these extra things. And people might think, oh, great, the court's going to consider that. Well, not for child support at all. The formula is very basic. What did you make last year, or what's kind of your average salary? Depends. If things fluctuate a lot, they might take an average. What is your spouse's salary? Plug that into the formula. There's also the overnights we're going to take into consideration, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. But then it just spits out a number, and the judge will use that number, really no questions asked. Again, you can ask to deviate from that guideline, meaning say, judge, there's some very compelling reasons why we need to deviate, but you not being able to afford it is not a compelling reason, believe it or not.
Yeah, well, we said, Bobby, that this was a segment about hard truths, and there you go. That is the hard truth. So we're just telling you the facts, guys. Well, like you said, let's move on to the next one. So our next truth is parenting time directly impacts child support. Now, we've also talked about this in the past as well. So, we talked about the formula, but how is the formula change based off of your parenting time?
All right, so there is a silver lining or a caveat to this whole child support being locked in stone thing, and that is that it is based on both your income and the number of overnights that you have. So if you have, or if the other side has 60% or more of the overnights, you're kind of going to pay the standard amount. But if you can get to the place where you have at least 40% of the overnights, then your child support is going to go down drastically. And if you get to the 50-50 place, then you may not even have to pay any child support. And even if you have, you make drastically more than your spouse, you could, you'll pay a nominal amount. Say you were going to pay $1,500, you might be paying $300 a month now.
Does that ever make gosh, are there ever times in this situation where people are fighting for more parenting time because they don't wanna pay the money?
You kind of nailed it. Yes. And that is one of the reasons I don't love this child support law, is because of this drastic 40% rule. People, when they're right on the edge of that, or as their attorney's advising them, they're saying, I can't afford to pay this child support, the attorney is going to advise them, well, if we can get more than 40% of the time, then this will go down drastically. You do get people who start fighting for time just to make their child support go down. And that's kind of a harsh truth, or a harsh reality of the situation. You can, the ideal way to do it and get away from this whole 40% game is if you're on the same page with the other side. And if you guys are able to work diplomatically and possibly figure out a schedule and a child support amount without the judge's input. Now, the judge is not going to just allow any sort of child support amount to go, but if you two can agree on a child support amount that is reasonable, a judge will usually go along with it.
Okay, that was one of my next questions because, we're talking about this formula. We're talking about parenting time and 40% versus 50% and all this, and it could all change. But again, like you're saying, so you're saying if you're able to go to the table together and say, "Hey, I think what works for our family is this," and it's not what the formula says, but you both agree, it's possible that you could sort of create that, the parenting time schedule and also what that amount, that child support amount was going to be. It's possible to come up with that together?
Yeah, you could come up with it together, and maybe you can get creative about it. Say, like, the child support's going to be less, but I'm going to agree to pay for all the extracurricular activities, or maybe there's a childcare amount and I'm going to pay a larger percentage of that. Yes, you can come up with your own child support amount. Again, it does have to be approved by the judge, and the lawyers are going to have to work together to make sure that the wording in the agreement is the kind of wording that the judge wants to hear, to make sure that the child's going to be taken care of. Neither party is going to be applying for any government aid. That's a big thing too. Like if the one parent is saying, no, I don't need any child support, that's our agreement, but they're also applying for government aid, the judge is going to say, no, we're not doing that. You guys need to be supporting yourselves. We're not going to go to a third party if you guys are deviating from the child support guidelines. So there is some nuance there, but you can come up with that agreement yourself.
Yeah, that's cool. And I've even heard of situations where they do have 50-50 custody, but the person who makes more money is like, hey, I will still pay a higher amount of child support because I care about the time. I don't care about the money, so like there can be situations like that as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And again, even with 50-50 time, if there is a big difference in the income amounts, there will be some child support payment. But like you said, one person could agree to pay even more than that. And I think that's a key thing to realize too. If you're truly a parent that is in it for the parenting time, and you just want to have that time with your child and you can afford it, offering that to the other side and saying, listen, this isn't about the money for me whatsoever. I'll happily pay you X amount of dollars per month to make sure that the child is as cared for or has as much at your place as they do mine. That can be a really good way to build goodwill with the other side, or nullify an argument that they have in court saying, oh, he's just going for he's just going for more time with the kid because he doesn't want to pay child support. Well, it's like, no, they've offered to pay regardless of the time.
Great. I love it. All right. So moving on to another truth here. The court assumes that two households must stay stable, even if it feels impossible. So let's break that down a little bit. We're talking about splitting up, the parenting time and, what the child support is going to look like. But you also have to have a stable home, right? I mean, you're not going to get that parenting time if you can't provide a place for this child to live and to be successful and to be safe, correct?
Absolutely. And stability is like the number one thing that judges look at when they're deciding what's in the best interest of the child. So, can you afford a apartment with 2 bedrooms so that you and the child, and if there's multiple children and depending on their age, more than 2 bedrooms, you're going to have to get. Can you afford to have a car so that you can get them reliably to school or to their extracurricular activities? And this is one of those areas where, depending on the situation, it can be pretty precarious to be a stay-at-home parent because you've spent so much of your marriage just caring for the children, just caring for the house, that you haven't developed your own independent source of income, that if the marriage ends, that rug can be pulled out from under you, depending on how much your maintenance is and for how long it is, and other variables. You might find yourself in a situation where the judge is saying, well, the breadwinner is actually providing a much more stable environment here. It makes more sense for them to have the child full time. Maybe the breadwinner has a highly flexible schedule, so they can both make the money and be there for pickups after school. You really, as a stay-at-home parent, need to make sure that you're not taking for granted that you will get custody, because before you know it, you could lose custody. And if you lose custody, then not only did you lose custody, but you actually have to pay child support, even though you don't make much money at all. So yeah, don't go into this process with rose-colored glasses thinking just because you're the stay-at-home parent and that you've been there for the kids the last couple of years that it's going to be a lock. You don't want to take anything like that for granted.
Do you have any advice for potential stay-at-home parents that maybe are listening to this right now and going, "Oh man, like I'm not sure if my marriage is going to work out, or we're in the middle of a divorce, or and they're fearful of that." Are there some steps that they can take to, try to help, steps now so that they do have a more stable environment once they kind of get in front of a judge?
Yeah, I mean, this can be a really tough one, especially if they're married to someone who's like has narcissistic tendencies or something like that. I mean, I know for me, I, I'm in this situation. My wife is a stay-at-home parent, and if something happened to us, which it won't, uh, certainly I can't imagine not continuing to be um, kind of just making sure that the family is financially okay. Like I can't imagine doing that to my wife and to my kids, but not everybody is like that. And you have very vindictive, narcissistic type spouses. So I think as a stay-at-home parent, you do need to start to get creative and think about what is your exit strategy? What can you do to make money? Who is your support system? Can you possibly move in with a relative or a parent, sister, that sort of thing that can support you while you get back on your feet, and just developing that support network of people and really starting to think practically about like what kind of job can I get to support myself? What kind of, there's certain degrees or licenses that you can get relatively easily that will put you in a place where you can make a good enough income to find a place. Life's not going to be as easy as it was financially before the split, but at least you'll have your more of your freedom and more of your independence. But it is going to be tough.
Absolutely. And I always like to remind people when they're, when you're going through a divorce, you are where you are right now. But once this is all over and the dust clears, you know, you can become something else. Like you may have been a stay-at-home parent, but you're going to be able you can find a job. Like you can do that. It may be a little bit of a longer road. You may have to go back to school or figure out some things, but like you're saying, like you can build a life and you're going to look back a few years later and be like, "Man, I had no idea how I was going to make it happen." And then after a few years, you can look back and go, "Okay, well, I did." Like don't ever think that just because that's where you are, that's where you have to stay. It's just that's your starting point. And some of the starting points after divorce are a little bit harder and a little bit further back than others, which, can be a challenge.
And what an amazing example and role model you are being when you do that for your kids to be able to see you, and especially if you're in a relationship that does have some of these narcissistic tendencies. For kids pick up on that, and if they see you reinvent yourself and create something from nothing, like that's an amazing example that you're giving them.
Yeah, it's so aspirational. So, I know that some of these things are hard to hear and, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about hard truths because we don't want you walking into divorce and being blindsided by some of the difficulties that are ahead. We want you to know what they are so that you're able to tackle them and you're able to get through the divorce process and move on with your life. So, we know they can be a little bit hard to hear. And if there's anything that you heard from our conversation today that you continue to have questions about, please let us know. Let us know in the comments. Send us a message. We're always open to, discussion ideas. And, it can be hard, Bobby, to talk about some of these difficult things, but we want to give people hope, right?
Yes, absolutely. There is a way through this. And I think if you have that right support network, if you have the clear vision of where you're going in the next chapter, you find the right lawyer, it can happen, especially for people in the more difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bobby, as always, thanks so much for being here with us today. And again, if there's anything you want us to discuss in the future, if you had any questions about our episode today, please reach out. We would love to discuss that with you or maybe talk about it on a future episode. And we will be back next week to wrap up the hard truths about going through a divorce.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.
podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.